kind of have a history of running on sometimes. Let me just start by saying thank you all for having me here with you tonight. You have very good representation with the Northern Kentucky Mental Health Regional Board with Judge Keith and Courtney Bourne, Harriet Bourne's wife locally, and I saw Pat Gibson, who just finished up a term on the board sitting out here. I heard a couple of things I want to comment on from our other speakers. Dr. Johnson talked about the history of substance abuse going back to the beginning of mankind. That's true. But I want to tell you, things have changed in terms of what is going on culturally. We didn't get here overnight. Now, North Key is involved in delivering services and treatment, but we're also involved in the prevention of substance abuse and mental health issues. We got here because in the early 1990s, this is the same thing that has broke the back of our government. It's the same thing that broke the back of our healthcare delivery system. I talked to a number of insurance executives about this. It's the same thing that is creating a heroin addiction that we're dealing with here today. What we have in this country is a unique situation. We are one of a kind. In the early 1990s, the pharmaceutical industry got a law passed to allow for the advertising of prescription medications on television. Okay, somebody in the early 1990s would have been in their teenage years or 20s would be about 40. Now, the use of medications are higher for a 40-year-old person in this country than an 80-year-old person in this country. Are the health conditions higher? No. The use of the drugs, though, is a cultural issue. The only way we're going to change that is to address that in a systemic, cultural way. We have created an addicted population. Watch the news, watch the 6 o'clock news, and count the number of commercials that you see on television. I heard OxyContin mentioned up here. When OxyContin was brought to market by the pharmaceutical industry, they advertised it as not addictive for about 3 years. They had the research showing that it was an addictive drug, but they did not release that to the public. Only last year was a law passed requiring the pharmaceutical industry to release that information to the public. I'll give you another great example that's in my field, Zyprexa. Zyprexa is an antipsychotic drug that was introduced about that same time. 1% of the population suffers from schizophrenia. That drug was so heavily advertised, the first year that it was on the market, it made $16.3 billion in profits. Folks, this is not something that one town hall meeting is going to change. We could solve our entire economic issue in the state of Kentucky. I've talked to a number of legislators about this. All of these commercials that run on TV, every single one of them could be taxed. They're not going to stop advertising these drugs because they make so much money off of them. That has created a culture where every kid thinks it's okay to take a pill, where every adult thinks it's okay to take a pill. That's their first response to any problem. We have got to make it known that is not the way to deal with every health problem that comes up. Most of our health problems in this country are directly related to lifestyle. Obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, the list goes on, and the same thing is true for many of the mental disorders. I could go on and on about this. I get the opportunity to review a lot of research. The board is good enough to me to allow me to participate in a lot of national things. So I get to see a lot of national organizations, and I get to participate on the Neuroscience Education Advisory Board. And that board, all the drugs that are out there and so forth come through a pipeline basically in the research. It takes about 10 years for a drug to get to market. But we went from World War II, when methadone was developed as an alternative to morphine in Germany because of the shortage that they were experiencing, to that being the only treatment for heroin addiction until about 15 years ago. And then about 15 years ago, there was a market there because we had created a culture that it was okay for everybody to take a pill. So when we created that culture, then the drug companies are now profiteering off of that. They're creating drugs to treat heroin addiction. But that doesn't solve our problem. If you look at the cost curve in our insurance, if you look at the cost curve in our healthcare system, it has gone skyrocketed since we implemented the law allowing the advertisement. I see my 1 minute is passed and up. I can go on, and I didn't even get to the things that Carolyn wanted me to talk about. So, thank you.
So I'm just going to assume that there are people out there who are going to try to save your own loved ones. I'm going to assume that you have family members who are caught and trapped in a cycle, and you are harmed from it, and they are. So let me talk about the overall plan that you need to keep in your mind for a regional plan, the things you need to focus on. Treatment, harm reduction, prevention, which is primary prevention, and what I'm going to call is recovery. Recovery means rehabilitation, relapse prevention, and re-entry. Obviously, if people have gone the wrong way, you want to get them back in. In your community, you have great power. You have to harness it. You're going to have to organize. You got to make one entity, one organization of people who are interested in doing this. The mothers, the family members, and you need to get together, and you need to understand, as a community, you're very powerful. I just referred to the NRA. They are very powerful, and they can protect their guns, and you're going to try to protect your people. So get together and make one organizational system. We have an organization up in Northern Kentucky called Northern Kentucky PAR. Charlotte can tell you more about the PAR. It's people advocating for recovery. And we, in 3 months, ended up with 270 people. And I tell you, there's nothing like having a mother who's lost their child or trying to protect their child who's interested in getting things done. I'm going to tell you that I can talk about each one of those elements very clearly. First thing, though, you're going to have to fight to get adequate treatment. And that also means that you have to figure out how to get mechanisms to match your funds so you can get people into treatment. If they're not in treatment, they're actively using. If they're actively using, they're recruiting other people. The best way to get somebody to not start is to make sure that they're not hanging out with people who are using. And the best way to save somebody's life is to help them get into treatment. The secondary thing that I was asked to speak about, or primary thing I was asked to speak about, was a medication called naloxone. The nice thing is we are very lucky. Naloxone is good for not just illicit drugs like heroin that are opioids, but I'll tell you, for the same prescription medications I prescribe my patients, and if they accidentally overdose, they can be used for that. And actually, as spoke before, most people who die from overdose are not dying from heroin, but from prescription drugs, and most often prescribed to them, but taken because they have pneumonia, or they took too much, or combined it with something accidentally, they overdose. So, naloxone now, legislation has been passed, House Bill 366, and the first responders here will eventually be able to have this medication. Right now, it's not FDA approved, but if it comes in a pre-filled syringe, not with a needle, but and then you get a packet of 2 of those with an aerosolizer. You can spray it up someone's nose who's actively overdosing, and they will wake up pissed off and probably a little bit of withdrawal, but alive. It's the same thing that the emergency folks use. They use it in needle form. Eventually, if things work out, and they will work out, and you can help with this because you can actually raise money and put pressure on different people to make it facilitate quickly enough, you will actually be able to have it, or your friends, or maybe the person who's actually using. And yes, this does not increase the likelihood of getting them to use more. Basically, if you look at the communities that have started using it, they've had a 50% reduction of deaths. And as Charlotte would say, you can't get into treatment if you're dead. It also reduces the morbidity and mortality. So it's called naloxone. You'll be hearing about it. I'm hoping to work with emergency room physicians, eventually distribute it through different facilities so that you can save your family members, and hopefully we can get them into treatment. We can prevent other people from starting. We can also make sure that we can figure out how to keep them from relapsing in the future. Thank you.
On the same offense and nothing happens. And we have another one that talks about relatively the same thing. How do people continue to get arrested and nothing happens from there?
Okay, Part of that you can thank your legislator for, so I'll start with that part of it. When I started here, every person who got picked up for possession of any type of narcotic, whether it be pills, heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, you did 6 months in jail. You didn't get, your bond was set at least $5,000 cash, and you did 6 months in jail. During that time, you got a substance abuse evaluation, and if you were honest with the evaluator, then you went to a rehab and you went from jail to rehab. You didn't go back on the streets, you didn't go back with your friends, you didn't go back with the same people that you were associating with, you went from jail to rehab. That's the way we did it for the entire time I worked with Jim Crawford in the 3 counties that we were in. In 2011-ish is when the legislature changed the law in which made anybody who gets picked up for possession of anything is supposed to get a bond as soon as they can be verified as having a place to live, and somebody will sign saying, I'll take them with me. That's the law. The judges, I can argue, Judge, they should be kept in jail. They look at the pretrial officers and say, what do they score? If they score low, they let them out on bond. And everybody scores low. And I know that once again is a long-winded answer to the question, but we try to do the best we can with jail and get them in their drug rehabs, but a lot of times they're beating the jailer when the police arrest somebody. The jailer takes them to jail, and a lot of times they're almost beating her back to the county before on a bond. So that's why you're seeing some of these people back on the streets, and you're saying, I know the sheriff, the city, the state police arrested them last night. What are they doing back out? I can tell you that's a lot of the problem of what's happening. Oh yeah, the sheriff just pointed out that they've also lowered the offenses for if you're trafficking pills. Now you have to be trafficking in more pills to get to the levels that it used to be. So if you're only selling 2 or 3, 4 pills, you're back to that presumed probation part that I'm talking about, that the prosecutors and the judges have to follow, as opposed to when it used to be if you sold 1 pill, it's just like you sold 20, and it didn't matter. But that's all been changed again. We're trying to save money through the housing people in jail. That's what they're, according to the state, but that's part of the problem as well.
When House Bill 463 passed, it was to save the Department of Corrections $450 million. And that money was to be diverted to the community to provide treatment, because it cost over $30,000 a year to keep somebody in prison, and it cost $3,500 a year to provide treatment. Corrections has yet to spend 1 dime in the community to provide that money for the services. In fact, the program that Ms. Weatherton represents, Transitions, they cut their program, which Corrections was paying for, from a year to 6 months. Folks, you cannot treat somebody with a heroin addiction in 6 months and expect a positive outcome. Now, if you look at the math and you save $30,000 and you spend $3,500, the worst treatment programs in the country have a success rate of better than 20%. Every single one of those individuals that does not end up back in the correction system pays for 10 other people to get treatment. So, the problem is that when these bills get passed, nobody follows up and makes sure what's supposed to happen happens. That money never made it to the community. Not one community provider has received one additional dime from the Department of Corrections.
Well, the question was, what is a parent advocate, what do you do, and what resources do they have to offer? I didn't ever think that I didn't wake up one day and say I'm going to be a recovery advocate. It just happened that I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something to make a difference for other people, because when we lost Casey, it was devastating, and we will never be over it. We get through it every day, but we'll never be over it. So as a recovery advocate, what I started doing was talking about it. I'm old enough to remember when cancer was whispered. People didn't talk openly about cancer, but think about what happened after they started talking about cancer. We started having, walkathons, telethons, all kinds of fundraisers, and as a result of that, there was all kinds of research dollars that were spent. Now we have more people living with cancer than dying from cancer. That's what I hope to live to see the day for people who have the disease of addiction. Now let's talk about the disease of addiction. Someone who is addicted is not capable of making a good decision for themselves. That's why Casey's Law is because someone or something has to intervene. Now, in the past, it's been the criminal justice system. That's why we're in the position that we're in now. We had incarcerated all these folks, and now we can't house them anymore. So now what are we going to do? What other disease do you know of that you have to be arrested first before you get treatment? I don't know of any other disease like that. I know that when Casey had the disease of addiction, we were told that he had to want to, lose enough, and hit bottom. We were waiting for all those things to happen. They did. He died. Nobody wants to be addicted, number one. People who have lost more than enough. They've lost their families, they've lost their homes, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their insurance, they've lost their self-respect, and more importantly, they've lost all hope that they can be anything other than what they are right now. And hitting bottom, what is bottom? People have hit multiple bottoms and still continue to use. That speaks to the power of addiction. Now, what do recovery advocates do? They do just what I did just then. They talk about it. We talk to each other about it, because I would be willing to bet that your neighbor, someone you go to church with, someone who lives down the street, is dealing with the same problem that you're having right now, maybe. And because you're not talking about it, then you're isolated and you feel so alone, just like the person who has the disease of addiction. Now, what resources do we have? Well, not nearly enough, I can tell you, not nearly enough. At Transitions, we have a grand total of 11 detox beds. 11. We've got an epidemic going on, and we've got 11 detox beds. Detox is the first step to getting into treatment. Treatment facilities do not want to take you in unless you've been detoxed, about 5 or 6 days usually. And so then what? Casey was told to call back. That would be like telling someone who's having a heart attack, take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. They may not live till the morning. Casey was told he could receive a summons within 90 days to appear in court. He did, the day of his funeral. When I called back to tell him that, she told me I didn't understand how the system worked. And I told her an addict does not have 90 days, he may not have 90 minutes. Those are the facts. Those are the facts. We are still telling people that they have to call back. We are still telling people there are a waiting list. Now, how can we change that? Every one of you. Every one of you talking to your legislator, letting them know what's important to you, that we need more funding for treatment and recovery resources. We have to talk about it, folks, and I know that typically this is a topic that nobody wants to talk about. And it's because of the shame, stigma, and discrimination that surrounds this disease that we're in pretty much the shape that we're in now, with nobody talking about it, and our children, our family members, our loved ones not getting the services that they need and they deserve just as much as anybody else. Because addiction is a disease. It is not a crime. Unfortunately, because of your disease, it causes you to do things that you would not normally do. I'm sorry, I went on and on.